Greetings, this is Larry. I'm coming to you from the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections, Election Judges Training Center. Today we're going to have a panel discussion and we want to welcome you or invite you to join us here. This panel discussion will be two young chief judges who will be talking with some of the more experienced chief judges about the job of being a chief judge on election day. They will ask questions that will cover a spectrum of topics from the week and night before the election, the day of the election, during the election, and closing the election. Let us get started. We'll kind of go around the room and introduce all of the panelists and the two new chief judges. We'll start on this end over here, if we may.
I'm Nicole Barkley, and I'm one of the new chief judges.
I'm Matt Giordano, former chief judge.
Robert Jones.
Gene Humphrey.
Again, I'm Larry.
Christy.
I'm Hardwick.
And I'm Nathan, one of the new chief judges as well.
Why don't we get started with the questions? Let's go ladies first, Nate, maybe?
Oh, Nate gets to go.
Okay.
So chief judges are the supervisor of the voting site, I understand. But what does that really mean?
What it means is chief judges are the ones that are responsible for virtually everything that happens in that voting center. They're the ones that manages the activities. They're the ones, if they have to, will be calling the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections. Chief judges are the ones that will be giving instructions to the other election judges in the voting center, dealing with any possible media that may come in, voters that have questions, they can talk to chief judges, and they will deal with challengers and watchers that might show up. Chief judges are basically the connection that the Board of Elections provides between the voters and the Board of Elections.
So what about the security of the materials and the equipment?
You must follow the chain of custody procedures, and you do that using the integrity reports, the certificate forms, and that when you're picking up the equipment and returning all the voting materials. And it's important that during the day that you maintain security over those forms the night before, all the equipment up to and leading when you return to the Board of Elections. This includes your memory sticks, your electronic poll books, the passcodes, the keys, even the ballots, the ballot activation cards, the paper ballots, just about everything that we deal with the voting. You want to make sure that you maintain this chain of custody, you know who has control of it. You can find more about it that goes into more detail. It's in Chapter 2 of your manual if you forget or if you have problems.
How will the equipment and supplies get to the voting center?
Well, most of the equipment will be delivered by the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections in the black and gray transport carts, and the ballots will be delivered in 3 blue transport carts. So all the equipment will be available at every location.
So when should I expect to get the information I need for the elections?
Well, you'll get that information about 10 days before the election. They will give you all the needed information that you will require, including names of the election workers and all that, so that you'll be ready.
What about my election judges? Will I be working with experienced ones?
Oh yeah, the goal is to place a new chief judge with an experienced chief judge. And also you will also have the election field support personnel assigned to assist you as well.
Okay. As a chief judge, what should I be doing to prepare for election day?
This becomes a very important issue because the Board of Elections has already sent their engineers out to inspect the school or whatever area that we're going to have for a voting center, but you're going to have to go out and visit the center yourself probably 10 days prior to the election. You're going to have to meet with, whether it's a custodian, an administrator, whoever they are at the school or place is assigning to be your point of contact, because at 5:45 in the morning, somebody's going to need to be available to open this place up. Chief Judge is also going to be in a position to check for chairs, tables, air conditioning, heating, what happens if I blow a fuse somewhere? How can I get to this? They're going to have to be able to deal with telephones. They're going to have to check the exterior of the voting center to make sure that we have available ADA handicap type parking and emergency evacuation routes, a shelter-in-place position. We're trying to make sure that you have everything that they need. So when the equipment, in fact, does arrive, we're ready to go. We also have to have a chief judge call the other election judges that are, in fact, going to be working with the chief judges.
Okay. I know that I need to call the election judges. When should I call them?
We call all the election judges about 7 to 10 days prior to the election, just so you can line up the times and make sure they know where they're going and what they're going to be doing.
So what if I don't get an answer when I call the number I have?
Well, if you don't, when you call the chief judges, you're going to find out about 3 things. You're first going to tell them, the time that you're going to go arrange to meet at the location center, so that you can set up all the tables and all the equipment, get it ready for the next day. You're also going to discuss any food or any medical needs that any voter is going to have. And you're going to let them know that they're going to be there for about 10 or 15 hours. They have to have all of that they need for the whole day because they cannot leave the premises. You're also going to talk about any potential job assignments at the voting center. So if a judge has a specific position that they would prefer, then they could probably arrange that at least at the start of the day, even though they'll be rotating to keep everybody fresh for the entire day.
Okay, so what do I do if I can't get in touch with one of them?
So if you can't reach any of the judges, one thing you're going to do is when you do call the judges, if you don't reach them, you are to leave a voicemail. Let them know who you are, that you are the chief judge, and what location you're going to be at, and leave a number that they can call you back. But if you don't reach them immediately, you should call the Board of Elections and let them know that you haven't reached that judge.
No, just to add to that, if I may, I think it's very important that when you do call, if you're anything like me, if it's a number I don't commonly see pop up on my phone, unless that person leaves a message, so it's important that you do leave a message of who you are and why you're calling them so they can call you back. But as Gene said, if they don't call you back within a reasonable amount of time, you should notify the Board of Elections so they can verify the phone numbers and so forth.
Somebody mentioned another resource that will be available to us, the EFS. What is that?
Election field support is a technician. It's someone who has received special training prior to the election, maybe a month before they come in here, and the trainers train them thoroughly on the operation of the equipment. They'll know aspects of the equipment that the chief judges will not have received or that the voting operations judges will not have received in their training. So the field support person is a technician with an eye on the operation of the equipment. For example, if we need to change the paper in the printer that goes with the poll book, we kind of neglect that in our training due to time constraints. So the election field person is the person to ask about that. Any issues that might come up as a surprise with alerts or messages on the screens of the equipment, the field tech is the one to contact first, election field support. And then they'll know to call the help desk or escalate the situation to our technicians here at the Board of Elections. So the election field support person should also maintain an incident report of any equipment that functions strangely or malfunctions, as it were. And they need to include the serial number of that equipment and a precise description of what happened and what windows or alerts appeared in real time as that happened. And they can even take pictures with their phone of these matters with the equipment. That way, it helps us going forward to identify equipment that needs repair, and they become part of our lessons learned. Election field support is the technician on duty who has a knack for the equipment operation, and so the chief judge can really find them reliable to them.
Will I contact them prior to the election?
Yes, the election field support person will meet with the chief judges at the Monday night setup, and so that's the time to make the contact. They can, if they want, call their election field support person. I'm sure that could be arranged, but certainly Monday night. before the election.
What things or questions should I ask the building point of contact?
Well, first of all, you're going to review a lot of different things to that POC, and let them know that you will be arriving around 5:45 a.m. And also you want to have them check the outside lighting and reserve disability parking. Check the heating, the air conditioning, make sure everything is accessible and working, because it will be a long day, and if we need air or heat, then we want to make sure it's working. You also want to have the election judges talk about the election judges and all their needs that may be available for, like restrooms, the break room, and those type of things, because people will be having all their required food, drinks, everything available that day. And you want to confirm the name and phone number for at least 5 a.m. emergency contact. Someone you can call to open the polling place in case you get there and no one's there to open it up. And you want to also verify the EFS phone numbers that you have, because you will have a couple of EFS, election field support personnel, that will be assisting you throughout the day.
What are the things I should make sure are done at the night before election day setup?
Well, one of the first things that I think is important is you need the sign-in sheet, because you've called all your election judges to come help you set it up. And so you want to make sure that everybody gets signed in so they can get paid. One of the second things you need to do is make sure that you have your Visio that you're going to be given, and go through, and if the room's not set up the way the Visio is, which is probably not, get the election judges and get them to help you set it up. You're also going to be given a tester for the outlets. You need to make sure all the power in the room is appropriate for when you start hooking everything up and getting it all hooked in. You're also going to be in charge of doing the electronic poll books and the Cradle Point router that evening to make sure that it gets up, it is working, and it's fed in. A lot of the other things that are going to be listed, or just doing your tape, making sure that your signs are up. You have a lot of signage that needs to be posted in the facility about the scanners, about provisional judges. You have some of the stuff outside. Make sure you know where it's going to be in the morning. A lot of the stuff that you want to do is make sure that the next morning is going to be as quick as easy as you can. You need to make sure your poll booths are set up and your ADA table is set up. Your ballot marking devices should be set up, not turned on. One of the primary responsibilities, as we talked about, is our chain of custody, making sure you don't have your seals and your security tapes broken as you're setting everything up. Make sure that you have your scanners out of the transfer cases and set up. The ballot issuing table needs to be, you need to have them all prepped and ready to break the seals in the morning. And most importantly, or as important I guess you should say, is make sure your provisional table is set up to go in the morning, because there are certain things that you have to have set up in the morning in order to open your election polling place. That, like I said, use your integrity reports, your certificates, and check all your seals, your security seals, and make sure all your equipment's in the right polling place.
So what has to be done on election morning before the polls open?
Well, this becomes the craziest hour and 15 minutes you've ever seen in your life. Chief judges should actually, election judges are supposed to arrive at 5:45. We would expect the chief judges to be there a few minutes earlier, so they're there to greet their election judges that are coming in, and the doors are open. Because you have that hour and 15 minutes to go in, and everybody's going to have a job to do. The people that are going to be assigned in line management are going to have to set up the no electioneering zone out there with that 100-foot rope and the cones. They're the ones that are going to have to post handicap parking and things of that nature before 7 o'clock. Maryland state law is going to tell us we're opening the polls at 7 o'clock in the morning. So before somebody can walk in the door, at least one, hopefully all of them, but at least one poll book has to be up and running. at least one scanner, one ballot marking device, and has to be up and running, and you have to have a provisional judge available for that at 7 o'clock. At that point in time, because this is a unique election, the masks and gloves and sanitizing wipes and everything else have to be available at the front door for the first voter walking in. Because as we all know, no voter is going to be allowed to walk in our voting center without a mask or a shield. Okay.
So what if one of the election judges doesn't show up at 5:45?
Well, the first thing that election judges are going to do is sign in, because there will be a sign-in sheet for every election judge that's there. By the time everybody has signed in, considering we're looking at possibly 30 judges, it'll take at least another 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes. If that other judge is not there at that time, the chief judge is required to call the Board of Elections, and there are reserve judges available, ready to go at a moment's notice. So that's what has to happen.
All right, I think we have before setup covered. What about during voting hours? Walk us through the things that you, as a chief judge, do and check on.
Well, the first thing you're going to do after everyone is signed in, you're going to walk around and make sure all the stations are up and running. Everybody's at their assigned location. Check outside to make sure that the electioneering zone is covered. You have your line managers set up outside. You're also going to check for social distancing. Make sure that everyone has everything that they need for the day.
Should I be able to do every judge's position?
As a chief judge, yes, you should be able to. You're probably the only one that, other than the assigned judges, that know every position. Because if you need to step in for someone to take over that position, that would be your job.
Will we have any written directions at the site for setting things up?
Yeah, there is. There's an envelope in the chief judge's black supply bag labeled step-by-step guides. So you will use that. That's a good resource for setting up the equipment in the morning. And that step-by-step guide will take you through every single step in getting that equipment ready for the day.
So what are some things that I should do and some things I can delegate to others to let them do?
Well, one of the things is checking the provisional transfer bag. That's where the provisional ballots go. So you can delegate that. You can delegate the opening of the DS200 scanner, the ballot marking device, and the electronic poll book. And also ensure that all the reports are completed and signed. Post the hour report, because every hour on the hour, you will have a report that you put on the wall so that anyone that wants to look at that count can see it. You track the ballot count to ensure that you don't run out of ballots, and that's important. You don't want to run out of ballots. So you want to make sure you have enough ballots to sustain you through the day. And there's a number of individuals using the ballot marking device. For this election, the minimum of 5 people per ballot marking device should use that ballot marking device. And like I said, you do want to monitor the electioneering zone. You want to check the power and the battery status on all their devices to make sure they're all green. And if the press comes in, you want to greet them and talk to them, and also notify the election judges if the media wants to take pictures. So you have to make sure that all the election judges are okay with their picture being in the media.
Just one side note, if I may add to that. Make sure you call the Board of Elections and let them know that the press is in your house, if you will. That's extremely important, all right?
Yeah. And last but not least, you want to also contact the Anne Arundel County Board of Election if there are any critical incidents that happen at the polling center in the course of the day. So you do want to notify them as well.
So how do I ensure that election judges get breaks and lunches?
Well, this will be discussed on the Monday night before and also the morning of Election Day. The chief judge is going to set up a roster, a sign-in roster, and he's going to let the election judges know that it's going to be on a first-come, first-served basis, who gets breaks and lunch at what times. It's going to be the election judge's responsibility to ensure that their position is covered if they need to take a restroom break, etc. They would let their chief judge know by raising their hand, and the chief judge would arrange for a replacement or take that slot himself while they're taking a break.
What if I have a problem with an election judge, a voter, or any equipment?
Well, from the equipment standpoint, Robert mentioned earlier, there is a step-by-step guide that the chief judge has for every piece of equipment, be it the scanner, ballot marking device, and or the poll book. You also have an EFS person there that is really technically trained on the devices that should be able to help on that. In reference to a voter, chief judge should probably have themselves and somebody else available to talk to that voter, depending on what the situation is. Most of the voters have questions, and from that standpoint, it's just a matter of discussing the issue with the voter and giving them an answer. If there becomes a difficult situation with a voter, chief judge can call the Board of Elections, and there's other alternatives. As far as the election judge, if there's a problem with an election judge, and regardless of what the problem is, chief judge should have a private conversation with that judge away from the other judges and voters. And if it can be resolved on the spot, that's fine. If it cannot be resolved, chief judge should call the Board of Elections, and actually you can replace that judge.
Okay. What are some of the typical situations that you have had to deal with on election day?
So, and me.
That's you.
All right. When I was an election field support technician in Somerset County in 2008, I made my rounds, and I had a round of about 4 or 5 chief judges in their precincts. And I remember Mount Vernon Fire Department, and I could tell that the chief judge was very capable, but very insecure about being a chief judge, especially with respect to opening and closing the voting tabulators. And so I made a mental note of that morning. And so I made sure that at closing time, I found myself back at her precinct at the fire department. And you would have thought Jesus walked through the door. And she was just so happy that I was there to help her. And what did we do? Take the step-by-step guide, and I held it, and we walked through it together as she closed the tabulators. So that made it a very positive experience for that chief judge. One thing that I like to teach my judges here in training is a feature of the audio ballot on the ballot marking device. And a gentleman came in here, and he was probably about 35 years old. He was here with his wife. He was obviously blind. He was very tall, too, and he had a white cane. And so everyone was kind of scurrying about getting the voter assistance form for him. And that's fine, and he's used to his wife assisting him. But when I offered him the audio ballot, you say, "Sir, we have an audio ballot here. Would you like to try it?" You would have thought I offered him $1,000. And he was overjoyed to use it. And I had just had the good fortune of attending the National Disability Conference in Baltimore. And Julian Castro was a keynote speaker for that event. And it was just very inspiring to hear all the testimony of people who feel empowered through their disability to help themselves to vote. And it's like what Congressman John Lewis has said, the vote is sacred. And you see it no greater in that moment with this blind person who did not need any assistance with the audio ballot. He sailed right through it. So it's good that we promote those opportunities to voters to keep their vote sacred. So those are a couple of examples that I have experienced that are memorable to me out there in the election world.
All right, so what do I do if a voter refuses to wear a mask and wants to vote?
Well, first of all, we respect everyone's right to vote. They do have a right to vote, we respect that. We regret that some voters are unwilling to follow the guidelines to maintain a safe and healthy environment for all to vote, including our election judges as well as the other voters. So the first thing you want to do as a chief judge, you want to make sure that more than one poll worker is present at any situation that may be coming up. The chief judge should not get into any confrontation with a voter, period. So if you do feel threatened or intimidated, or if the voters feel threatened or intimidated, the chief judge could then call 911 and then call the Board of Elections and let them know of any situation that is occurring.
So what is same-day registration?
Well, same-day registration is when somebody needs to come in or wants to come in on that day of election and register to vote. This is going to be somebody who's not already registered, and the voter comes in. They're only going to be done by the provisional check-in judge, who's going to be trained in how to help these people, and they'll be using a barcode scanner. Normally, we ask them for their Maryland driver's license or their Maryland ID, and it is scanned, and then it comes up in the electronic poll book that they're either qualified or non-qualified. If they're already pre-qualified, they've already been scanned, everything's okay, they go ahead and vote a standard vote. If for some reason they come up and they're not pre-qualified, then they have to vote provisionally. And this comes up, it's 11 and 12, and the provisional judge goes through all the codes and they'll understand how to get them checked in.
So how do you cancel a VAC?
Oh, okay. To cancel a VAC, the chief judge will have to accomplish this task, and it's done on the electronic poll book. And so you pull up the voter, and they will be red flagged as already having been issued a ballot. Or actually, it's a VAC, but the poll book refers to it as a ballot. And they'll be on the voter record screen, and then they touch the identification tab, the second tab over. And that gives the chief judge access to the screen after they put in the supervisor's code, which is in their blue binder. And then they can cancel the VAC on the next screen, and then the next screen will show a window that says to remove the VAC, you have to touch the highlighted yellow portion of the screen. That removes the VAC. And then you say it changes. That's the last button that the chief will touch. And the chief does all this on the poll book. So the check-in judge will just scoot aside and let the chief do their thing. And after the chief has accomplished this task, they need to register that in the canceled VAC log and put the VAC and the cancellation stub in the appropriate envelopes with their, I believe it's with their blue binder materials. Okay. And that's canceling a VAC.
Okay. What is a provisional voter, or what is provisional voting?
Well, provisional voting is a voter that claims that they are eligible to vote, but the database and any other requirements do not support that claim. So the law states that we cannot deny anyone the right to vote. So for a provisional voter, this allows for verification of a person's eligibility to vote in the election. When they are found in the to be in fact eligible to vote, the ballot will be counted. Now, if the person who registered to vote today is not pre-qualified, i.e. their proof of address, identification, etc., they would vote provisionally. Once these things are verified, their ballot would be counted. So in essence, a provisional voter is any voter that comes into the voting center and we have to verify their information, any type of information, they would typically be a provisional voter. Your standard voter is anyone that their name, address, and date of birth matches. They're your typical or your standard voters. But other than that, if the voter, we have to verify any of that information, that voter is typically a provisional voter.
I understand there are a lot of forms I have to complete. Is there any place where I can find these and put them back after I'm finished with them?
In the white binder, there's a lot of dealing with personnel, and the all-important sign-in sheet I keep talking about is one of the most important in there, the sign-in and sign-out sheet for the pay.
So there's also a couple of other forms, one of which is the voter assistance form. If you have a voter that comes into the polling place and they're there at the poll book, getting you checked in, and they say they need assistance, if they brought somebody with them, and they're over 18, they need to fill out a form. So the person at the poll book will fill out the first part, just putting in the voter's name and address. The second part will be filled out by the person assisting. That would be if they're over 18 and they put their name and address. And there's a few statements that they need to read, and it basically verifies that they're not with a political party, they're not with a union, and they're not going to sway this person in any way. They have to sign and date it. That's a requirement. And then the third part is, on that form, is if the person did not bring somebody with them and they come to the poll book, then the person at the poll book would get the chief judge, and they will assign 2 judges from the polling site of different parties. So we have unbiased people to assist. And those 2 judges would sign the form, their full name, as well as their party affiliation, and they will assist that voter however they need it. So the other form that we have is a voter update form. And that's in case the person comes to the poll book, they get checked in, and if there's something that needs to be updated, like their address is wrong, or they've moved within 21 days, they can do a voter update form, and they can vote the standard ballot. The other thing is, if the person pulls up the voter in the poll book and they can't find them, so then they go through and they look them up by address, and they do find them, but they find that their name is incorrect. Then we can also correct that by means of a voter update form as well. And again, the voter has to sign it and date it. And that goes to the chief judge to be returned to the Board of Elections that night.
So what about the challengers and watchers?
Well, there's really 2 types. You have certified and non-certified challengers and watchers. Certified challengers and watchers will have a certificate that has been signed by a political party, a candidate. It'll come through the State Board of Elections or the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections. These people are in a position that the watchers normally are there to see that we are following all the laws of the state of Maryland as far as elections, to make sure that there's no way that anything fraudulent is happening, that we are following all the rules from the standpoint of even opening up the equipment, showing that their starting points are 0 and things like that. These people, when they come in, will report to the chief judge, and the chief judge will locate them and show them where they can operate from. These people cannot interfere with any of the operation of the voting center. They cannot be viewing poll book information or things like this. They can be within earshot. They can be there prior to the opening of the polls to see how we're doing it. They can be there at the end of the evening, as long as they're inside prior to the polls closing. Once the chief judge has locked the doors, nobody else comes in until we're finished. But these people are there to make sure, and there are people that will be there opposing ballot options or questions that they have on the ballots, either pro or con for those things. Or again, these are people that'll be looking at the reports on the walls as far as every hour that we post a report, how many voters have come in, and they're reporting back to whomever. But they still cannot use electronic devices in the voting center. So challengers can actually challenge an identification of somebody. When somebody comes up to a polling center and gives a name and that says, no, you're not, we will be put in a position where that voter would have to show an ID to prove that they are who they said they were. And still does not stop their ability to vote. And if they cannot produce that ID, then there'll be a form that has to be filled out by the chief judge, and we go from there. Normally, challengers and watchers do not interfere with the operation, and they're just there. So,
Like the wallpaper?
like the wallpaper sometimes. Hopefully that's all it is.
Hardwick, isn't there one more form?
Yes, I was thinking, there's the certificate of participation. An employer may require their employee who wants to vote, go to their precinct to vote, to bring back with them proof of their having been there to vote, and it's called a certificate of participation form. The chief judges can find those in the white binder.
Yes, those are all the white binders, and then you have a blue binder.
Yeah, the blue binder, I'll speak to that since everybody's looking at me. The blue binder is the chief judge's blue results binder, and there, chief judge is going to find the keys to the kingdom, no, the keys to the polling place. All of your transport cards, your ballot cards, the devices, your keys for that will be located in the blue binder. Also in there will be the most important thing is key phone numbers, help desk phone numbers. One of the things I would encourage you to do, once you get the phone number of your election field support person, you would have them write that phone number on that page as well, so you have an immediate place to go back to be able to dial them up if necessary. Along with the keys to all the devices, you'll find the passcodes for all the devices and or for canceling a VAC, as Harvick spoke about earlier. In the blue results binder also are the integrity reports. The integrity reports are a part of the chain of custody process, and they will help you to identify that you have the correct devices located in your polling location. And these should be filled out by a bipartisan team for both the ballot marking device and or the electronic poll books, as well as the DS200 scanning unit. The other reports that you'll find in there are your spoiled ballot tally sheet, which your ballot issuing judge would get to track the number of spoiled ballots or replacement ballots that they might issue throughout the course of the day. You'll have the blue transfer bin log that would be used to document when you remove a filled bin from the DS200 scanning unit, and after being filled with 1,500 single-page ballots. You'll have your tamper tape and seal log also in the blue results binder to track if you have to replace a tamper tape or seal there. You'll have the problem VAC log in there for documenting or logging in those VACs that you canceled, or a VAC that may have been destroyed, i.e. when you tore it off the printer, you had to replace it, so you need to document and track that. And those VACs are not thrown away, folks. They're also put in the spoiled VAC envelope as well. You'll find the envelopes in there for the spoiled VACs and a few other items, or spoiled ballots as well. There's one key form that you'll find in the blue results binder that every chief judge will fill out starting from the night before until they actually bring back and return the equipment at the close of the election. And that is the election day, chief judge's election day log. And that's a journal that the chief judge should keep. If you think it shouldn't be written in there, write it anyway, because it probably needs to be written in there. These logs are extremely important to the Board of Election, to your field support team, because if someone raises a question to the Board of Election about an event that took place at a polling place, this is where we're going to go to first to get some information. And also it helps us to help remind you about an event if it happens after the polls have been closed when something comes up. These are just a couple of the things that you'll find in the Chief Judge's blue results binder, but the important things are the keys, the passcode, and the integrity reports, and the Chief Judge's election day log. These things must be used in, as they're intended to help us keep track of and operate within the guidelines of the voting laws and guidelines.
Oh, Larry, could I ask, there is one other important report that you didn't mention, and that's the closing report.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
expand on that?
How could I not mention the closing report? Why did you mention the closing report? I thought you guys didn't want me to talk about that. Anyway, the closing summary report is the basic audit of the election day. You're gonna pull information from the ballot table, ballot report, provisional judge, the election, the check-in judges, and/or the voting area judges at the scanning unit. So all of these reports will feed into what's known as the closing summary report, which basically is kind of an audit trail of the election day as far as checking in voters, how many voters have been voted, how many ballots. And it's kind of like the accounting, if you will, of the election day. Because if I gave out 10 ballots, I should have 10 vax, I should have 10 people checked in. So it keeps everything in check. And that's extremely important that those numbers balance out at the end of the day.
Are there certificates that keep track of anything else in there?
There's ballot, an opening and closing certificate, and it's very important because it's kind of like when you're given a till with money in it, you want to double check so that they don't charge you. The same thing's going here. You're going to be getting 2 huge blue bins that's going to have all the ballots in it. Every ballot has to be counted because by the end of the day, you need to know where each ballot went, whether it was spoiled, whether it was cast. And this opening and closing certificate, you'll start the day by making sure that all the packs that they say were sent to you were in the bin, ready to go. You'll do another count about midday, and then towards the end of the day, you'll do the closing certificate. Just like with the closing report form, with the spoiled ballot forms, with everything else, you should be able to account for every ballot that was used that day by the end of the day.
Will there be a lot of ballots?
There's going to be a lot of ballots, and there's going to be 195 different ballots because on election day, we're going to be representing Anne Arundel County, so it will be one precinct. So anybody anywhere in Anne Arundel County will be able to vote their ballot at any of the voting centers on that day. So there are going to be 195, and they'll come in packs of 100. So luckily, there's going to be quite a few ballot judges there to help count.
6 to be exact.
What about provisional? Do we have any forms for that?
Oh, yeah, well, for provisional, there are a number of forms that we use for accountability and auditing. One is your opening closing certificate. There is the voter sign-in sheet, the ballot application envelope, and last but not least, the orange ballot transfer bag. And that bag is where all the provisional ballots go when the voter is finished marking their ballot.
So what about the logs? What other logs are there?
Well, Larry brought up a good point. Probably the most important log that you're dealing with is the chief judge log, and that is for the chief judge to put anything and everything that is out of the ordinary that has happened in the voting center during that day. And from breakdowns of pieces of equipment to challenges with a challenger or a watcher, issues with a voter, whether resolved or unresolved. That is that running journal that Larry was talking about that gives you an opportunity, gives the Board of Elections an opportunity to go back. If anything comes back in the long run, and the chief judge can say, this is what happened. And it helps dramatically. He also mentioned your voter authority card log, because anything that has to be canceled or it is destroyed, and they have to keep track of all those because, as Christy was talking, with the number of ballots, if we start off with 10,001, we better end with 10,001. And for every ballot that's been issued, there is a VAC that has to count in there too. So that becomes an important log. Past elections, they've had absentee bags, obviously with all the drop boxes that we're going to have at every every voting center, and at the Board of Elections, we will not be using those.
Just one more question from me. Do I have to deal with those people outside who give pamphlets and bother voters and stuff?
That sounds like an electioneering question. So folks who promote their candidates, their causes with literature and probably bright colored clothing and lots of energy are outside the polling place, and they do add to the festivity of the location. You can always identify a precinct where voting is taking place by these people. They're out there in throngs, and they're encouraged to come and be there as long as they're well behaved, which they typically are. But they must respect the 100-foot boundary that is placed from a point in the middle of the entrance to a 100-foot radius all around that entrance. And if they encroach on that boundary, it's important for the line management judge, who will be the first point of contact, to remind them gently that they need to respect that boundary. Electioneers, like voters, may push back, and if they do, then we don't escalate the situation. That's why we have the chief judges there. That's why we pay them 50 cents more an hour, because they handle the conflicts. And we don't need heartburn, those of us who are line management judges. They'll also need to take into account its COVID-19 conditions, so they'll have 20 orange cones in the black transfer cart that they'll put in place 6 feet apart before the polls open on election day. And they will decide how that line is going to wrap around and so forth, and make sure those cones are 6 feet apart and that voters respect the 6-foot physical distancing. Also, there'll probably be the issue is that national candidates even have said, even though you've requested your ballot and sent in your ballot, make sure it was received by showing up on election day at the precinct. So thank you very much, candidates out there. So what will our workaround for that, because the poll book will not show that these people have mailed their ballot in like it did in the primary. So the workaround for that is the election field support, in conjunction with the line management judge, will have access to that tablet, and they can help a voter look up on the website elections.maryland.gov, and we can find out easily, it's very user-friendly, the status of their ballot and if we have received it. Or the voter himself or herself can be encouraged to use their smartphone and said, look, here's the website, go to it and help yourself. And this can all be handled outside, and the line management judge will probably be the typical first point of contact in that situation.
Actuality, if I may interject, there will be signs posted outside of the polling center, voting center, with the website on it. So anyone standing in line can simply use their smartphone or their iPad to look it up and check their ballot status as well. So we're making it as obvious as possible the ways that they can check on their ballot status while waiting in line.
And if they bring their voted ballot in the envelope signed and sealed and ready to be dropped in somewhere, a mailbox or whatever, then the line management judge can check for that. Say, anybody bring their ballot? And if they did, and he says, so see that drop box over there? Please go drop your ballot in there. I assure you it'll be picked up today. So the line management judge can also make sure that the voter knows about how long it'll take to get full service. And we generally think that in 1 minute we can service 2 voters. So if there are 30 voters in line and you're the 31st voter, it's going to take you about 15 minutes to get through the voting process. So that is a summary of the line management functions.
So since the polls close at 8 o'clock, we start shutting everything down at 8 o'clock, right?
No, not exactly. The rule is that the polls open at 7 and they close at 8. But in actuality, the process is as follows. At 8 o'clock, the chief judge will go out outside the premises and see how many voters are in line at 8 p.m. It would take another person with him, another election judge, to stand there with a last in line sign, and they will stand with that voter. Everybody in line at 8 p.m. has the right to vote, and they will come in the building and we'll go through the whole process and we'll vote. That last in line voter will be coming through the line, everybody's coming through. Everybody in the polling place, all election judges, are to stay up and running, including the poll book check-in table, until that last voter has come through and gone through the entire process. Once that voter has come in, been checked in, issued their ballot, completed their ballot, scanned their ballot, and left the building, at that point, the chief judge will shut the door and say, the last voter has now left the building, we can now start our shutdown processes. And then, and only then, can you begin shutting any position down, from poll book to scanner to every position in the building. So we don't start until the last voter has come in, gone through the process and voted, left the building, and the chief judge has declared the last voter has gone.
Let me interject something there too. Because this is a unique election at the same time, yes, people will be able to, they will stop coming into the voting center. But also at 8 o'clock, we have those drop boxes out there. Those drop boxes, and because of the noise that we've heard from all over the place, we expect to have a lot of people driving their vehicles up to drop their ballot in the box. The last person in line in their car, and we still haven't figured out exactly how we're going to do that yet, but the last car in line at 8 p.m. is also going to be the last person to be able to drop their ballot into the drop-off box. So chief judges need to be aware that they have an outside operation going on at the same time.
Yeah, I know it sounds, you guys are new judges, and I know it sounds like a lot, but one of the things we emphasize as we're training our other judges that I also want to point out to you guys is you have that election judge manual. It has everything in there. It has copies of all the forms. It has copies of all the jobs if you're interested for anybody else's job. But also, one thing that I like that we've pointed out several things that you have to do before and during and everything else is there's checklists in there for each position. So there is a chief judge checklist in there. If you're not sure if you've covered it all, take your manual with you that day. You know, leave it on your desk, open it up, and use your little pen and just go down and say, hey, I've done all these things. And that way you won't feel like, oh, what am I forgetting, or did I forget anything, or whatever. Is we use the manual a lot. Feel free to use your manual. Larry, anything?
Any other questions, guys?
No.
Any other comments from members of the panel?
I think we covered everything.
Well, another thing is, you know, she did mention the manual. Hardwood mentioned that we have all the step-by-step guides, and also your chief judge that are in charge of the entire polling place. They're an excellent resource, as well as all the other experienced judges that you have that are working along with you that can help you along this process. And I found the last several years that they are very willing to help anybody and everybody. So all of these resources are all available the entire day.
One more item. With COVID, we have provided from the Board of Elections, there are a ton of antiseptic wipes, gloves, masks, even ear coverings for the headset for the ballot marking device. One thing that's going to happen is that anything the voters are touching, the voting area where they're marking their ballot, the touch screen on the ballot marking device, the 200 scanner over there, we'll be wiping these things down after each use. There will probably be at least one judge or something involved in each area to ensure that we keep everything safe, sanitary.
We mentioned a lot of things during this discussion today. As several of the members have already said, that all of these things can be found in the election judge's manual. There's only 14 chapters in there, so it makes good bedtime reading in case you're looking for something to help go to sleep in the evening. But we do encourage you to read it. Chief Judges, Chapter 5 is the chapter that covers the Chief Judge's duties and responsibilities, and is extremely well written. As mentioned, there's a checklist in there as well. We also have these online. If you go online to the election workers or to the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections, election workers, and under training, you will find the website or the link for the election judge's manual as well. You will also find there what is known as the knowledge enhancement exercises. And these are a group of exercises or questions, if you will, to kind of help you think about and become better prepared in dealing with a lot of the things you will encounter on election day. We encourage you to read the manual. We strongly encourage you to chat with other election judges. Feel free to give us a call here at the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections. And most of all, we look forward to seeing you here in training, in-person training, soon. Have a great day, and until we see you here and working with you out on election day, be safe.